This is a serious concern. The hysteria is growing and confrontation is incited, basing on the claims that the government of Syria has applied chemical weapons on the 21st of August in Ghouta. And on this pretext, massive military build-up is witnessed in the region. Calls can be heard and threats can be heard that military force will be used against the Assad regime. Washington, London and Paris officially stated that they have cogent evidence, cogent proofs that the Syrian regime is guilty, but they can't present this evidence. They haven't been able to do it so far, but they are they voice the opinion that the red line has been crossed and there can be no delay in acting. These actions run counter to the accords that were enshrined by the G8 leaders during the Lock Ein summit in June this year, and the declaration has it in black and white that any information on the use of chemical weapons in Syria should be thoroughly and professionally investigated, and the results of such investigation should be submitted to the UN Security Council. And those G8 summit participants who now shrug off this accord try to assume the role of the investigators and the Security Council. Per se, we have been adamantly supportive of investigating any claims that chemical agents were used or might have been used. And like investigating this situation, one should analyze fully the information that circulates in the internet and questions the use of the chemical weapons by the governmental forces. The internet has a lot of comments made by professional experts from UK, US and other Western countries that state that there is no proof that these video images are unsubstantiated. In some blogs there is information that these video images and clips were posted on the video sites had been posted hours before the chemical attack against the opposition forces was announced by the TV channels. Those who want at any cost to proceed with the military scenario are not satisfied with yesterday's accord reached by the Syrian government with the UN experts to organize the on-the-ground or in-situ visits to the regions where supposedly these chemical agents, noxious agents, were used. So these accords of yesterday are shrugged off on the pretext that it's a belated one, and the opponents say that in 5 days one could have destroyed all the evidence. But we have the question why our Western partners that are now so concerned over the disappearance of the evidence didn't care about the preservation of the proofs when the UN experts in Farm al-Assal wanted to visit that place to investigate the supposed use of chemical weapons there on the 19th of March. There are now no concerns. At that time, there were no concerns that evidence would disappear, but the Russian experts carried out their own investigation back then on the incident of the 19th of March, in line with the criteria of the OPCW, and presented a professional comprehensive report to the UN Security Council members. This is a substantiated paper as against those claims of cogent evidence that are made now that the Bashar al-Assad is guilty of the scenario of the 21st of August this year. So we have question, because the chemical attack of the 21st of August was announced when the experts headed by the Swedish specialist Sellström arrived in Damascus and had already coordinated the plan of their work and the modalities of their operation there. And very many serious analysts now wonder, is there any sense for the Syrian government to have used the chemical weapons under those conditions I have just cited. And this information announcement about the Guta chemical attack happened at the very moment when Russian-American experts were preparing for another meeting to convene a new Geneva conference. And this hysteria will definitely work against this new meeting. This is doubtless. Probably this might be one of the aims pursued by the sponsors of this piece of news. The opposition wants no talks, this is obvious, and they say that would only agree to unconditional capitulation of the regime, of the Al-Assad regime. And these approaches will be further backed by the information campaign that has now been unfolded in favor of the military resolution of the Syrian crisis. And tracking the developments, we can see that as soon as a chance emerges to sort things out politically and peacefully, attempts to derail them are immediately taken. This was the case of the Arab League observers and the peace plan of Kofi Annan and the observer mission of the United Nations to Syria. And now we can see a similar attempt to subvert the Russian-American initiative as of the 7th of May this year to convene an international conference to fully implement the Geneva Communique of the 30th of June 2012. Unlike the representatives of the Syrian government who agreed to send their delegates without any preconditions, the opposition so far, up to this moment, 5 months past the accord, did not agree. So I'd like to understand what signals oppositional leaders receive from their sponsors as regards the preparation of the conference. Let me cite the Daily Beast website, an American website, the statement made by the National Coalition, Hamid Saleh, that the what Americans say to the opposition leaders: you will sit down the table and say that you require the deposing of Assad. They will not agree, and in this case, we will emerge to the scene. So if there is no resignation of Assad, we will emerge. I hope that this is not true. Yesterday I spoke with Mr. Kerry, U.S. Secretary of State, and he confirmed the commitment of Washington for international conference. They keep working with the opposition, he said, to ensure their participation, and I called on my colleague to make coordinated signals and send coordinated messages to all the related parties of the conflict, all the government, the groups of opposition, that there is no alternative to a political settlement via a direct dialogue of the Geneva II conference. This is what we do in our contacts with Damascus and all groups of Syrian opposition, and we're committed to the provision of the declaration, which is of utmost importance, made at Loch Ain Jade Summit, when the leaders stated that governmental and oppositional efforts should be joined and merged to combat terrorists together, to make them leave, to squeeze them out of the Syrian Arab Republic. And I believe this should be the focus of the efforts of the Jade leaders and all the international community, as against the military build-up of assault groups and inciting confrontation. We had this movie before in Iraq and Libya. Not a single case of the military interference and intervention resulted in things improving and life standards improving or stabilization in place. On the contrary, the region is destabilized in an unprecedented way. So everybody should be responsible, should act with utmost responsibility, work together in concert, as was agreed by our leaders in Loch Ain Jade Summit in June this year. Now I'm ready to take your questions. So colleagues, please, the first question from Russia 24 TV channel. Russia 24 TV channel, Dina Ivanova. Concerning Geneva 2, I'd like to ask you a question. There's been a lot of talk about this conference, and you said it's very important to hold it in near future. Any specific dates? So when it's scheduled for? As you can understand, to hold the conference, one should fix the number and the makeup of the participants and establish it. After the Russian-US initiative was announced on the 7th of May, the government said that it would be ready to send their delegates without any preconditions. The only aim of Russia and US being borne in mind that the talks should be in place, should be conducted so that the Geneva communique as of 30th of June last year should be fully implemented. Their position did not voice any consent. First, they said they wanted some additional guarantees, additional strings. Then at the start of the year, the then leader of the oppositional coalition, Mr. Al-Hatib, stated that he was ready for talks without any preconditions. Afterwards, he was quickly and immediately deposed, and the current opposition leaders state that the military balance and alignment of forces should be restored so that they can visit and attend the conference, and guarantees should be provided that the delegation of Assad would have the declaration of capitulation ready and would submit all the powers to the opposition, which runs counter to the Geneva communique of last year and which is the basis of the Russian-American initiative, because this communique says that the government and the opposition groups should be in accord on the parameters of the transition period and on the establishment of the caretaker body that would prepare the future elections and constitution. So now it's not about fixing the date or scheduling the conference and try to persuade those who are still hesitant, the opponents of the regime who are still hesitant. Their position is too negative to proceed with organizational matters and procedural matters. And in line with the accords we have reached with the Americans, our partners with the United States try to work with them. And as yesterday Mr. Kerry reassured me, he commits to have the opposition in place at the Geneva conference in a constructive mood without any unrealistic preconditions in their minds. As soon as we have this consent of theirs, we could proceed with the discussion of less dramatic questions like the participation of some other groups. The Kurds are interested in being represented at this conference. They want to be part of the united Syria, of a single state. They want to negotiate the limits, the borders, the frontiers of their autonomy, and the circle of external participants also must be subject to negotiation. Iran's candidature is the most problematic issue. We believe that this country plays the role of paramount importance as regards what happens today in Syria, and those who are indeed stakeholders to the conflict should be present at the negotiating tables. There are some other states that are willing to participate in Geneva 2 conference, but they have adopted, a very subjective or partial stances, saying that Iran does not deserve it. But it's not about prizes to be handed out. It's not a sort of a gift-giving. It's going to be a meeting of a group of states to have the highest level of representation so that all the stakeholders to the conflict should be represented at the conference. So, various timelines were named. September was named, but I believe that it's not realistic now. It's not viable. So we should first deal with the substance of the conference. as soon as possible, and then we will be able to negotiate the exact date further on. Thank you. Reuters.
Агентство Рейтер, Алексей Онищук.
Reuters agency, Alexei Onishuk, could you tell me if the UN inspectors will find the evidence of using the chemical weapons by Assad's regime, will Russia reconsider its position and maybe vote for military intervention into Syria in the Security Council, or maybe abstain in the Security Council as it happened in Libya case? And secondly, does Russia have a plan B if the US begins the military intervention into Syria? Is Russia ready to use other forces besides diplomatic statements to protect its stance? Well, the questions of if are not usually answered at press conferences. I'll just like to make clear one thing. The experts which are now in Syria have the mandate to determine whether the use of chemical toxins forbidden by international conventions took place and what were the agents. They are not mandated to carry out the verdict about who used these agents, government forces or one of the multiple opposition groups, be that the Free Syrian Army or terrorists or some other groups. And that is why the logic of this process was fixed in the log iron by the leaders of the G8 in the following order. First, there should be an unbiased professional investigation, and then the results of this investigation will be reported to the Security Council, UN Security Council. And the Security Council, when it determines the source of using chemical weapons, it will take into account all the cumulative load of information, including theoretical and factual information available in the internet and other mass media. You are welcome, Lebanese channel. Lebanon. Mahmoud Hajar, Lebanon Communication Group Al-Hajar. Mr. Lavrov, I wouldn't speak of ifs, but when there is a situation that the West and other allies will not listen to the Russian diplomats and they take this insane step, what would be the position of Russia in that case? And for 2.5 years now, we've been using this reason and common sense. Are those diplomatic actions enough to stop this insanity from the Western side and for their adequate response? Thank you. Well, you know, it is very difficult to understand the real motives by which our Western colleagues are guided when, having had the destructive interventions in Iraq, then in Libya, and having not solved any other problems which have emerged during the Arab Spring, in order to assist to the mentioned states to have stability and interconfessional and inter-ethnic peace, not having solved those problems, those countries begin to make statements at the summit level which are really astonishing. And they're astonishing in a way that we could not understand the political path which those statements set. I asked John Kerry yesterday during our phone conversation what was the strategy of their actions, how they planned to make it sure that the almost declared, although not yet sanctioned, action against Syria could help to solve the problems in the region and not multiply them and not lead the region to the real catastrophe. What are your plans to ensure that? I asked. And his answer was, I'd say, a bit narrower than my question. He just called on Russia and China to join the efforts on eradicating chemical weapons and not allowing it to be in the wrong hands. By the way, speaking about the strategies of our Western partners, just look attentively. A couple of years ago, one of the most popular calls that were addressed to us, and some of them to China as well, these were calls on Russia to take the correct side in history. And just remember, for the last 6 months, or maybe 12 months, I don't have it in my memory that there were any calls about the right side in history were repeated. I don't remember that, because few people understand what would be the end of the process called Arab Spring. And if someone thought of this process as a manageable chaos, then only the last word remains now of this word group, chaos. I do not support the theory of conspiracy, the conspiracy theory, but I believe that those actions that someone supports is now in the forms which the international community has to ensure of the dialogue and national reconciliation within the countries. But instead, we see that many key actors have begun taking sides and act on the principle the winner is always right, and forgetting the old alliances, placing bets on those who thought to be the winning side, and then the winning side turned to be the losing side, etc. This policy, this kind of policy, is the policy ad hoc, as we say, but we need to have a comprehensive policy instead. And we need to have the logical policy. You can't, for example, fight with the regime only because you personally do not like the dictator leading it, and not fight some regimes where you like the dictator. Or maybe, as I spoke with my friend Laurent Fabius when we discussed all those matters, in Mali, for example, the French were helping to fight against terrorists and illegal groups which were armed and supported by the French in Libya. So here we should step back from the personal, political likes and dislikes. We have to determine the main threats, that is, the terrorism, the extremism, illicit arms trafficking, accumulation of weapons in the region, allowing the weapons to go into the hands of the illicit armed groups. This creates huge threats. This is what we should discuss, but not the fact that let us just deal with Syria forgetting everything else. It happened so in Libya, and it had happened so in Iraq. There, the consequences and implications for the Arab world were not taken into account. And the fact that external players are being involved in the conflict, forcibly involved in this or that conflict in the Middle East and in the north of Africa, this fact could lead to sharp aggravation of the likes and dislikes in the Islamic world. We shouldn't forget that, including during our work with the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. When we work on creating the alliance of civilizations to enhance the dialogue of civilizations, we are calling on all our Muslim friends to follow the principles of the Oman Declaration, which was adopted at the conference hosted by the King of Jordan several years ago, and where all Muslim religious people announced that all Muslims are brothers and there can be no wars among the Islamic countries. But the recent events just make the sad thoughts appear, and About the question of our Reuters colleague about the Plan B, using force without the sanction of the UN Security Council is this severe violation of the international law. And I'd like to highlight, even if we leave aside the legal aspect, then we still have the moral and ethical aspect, which is remaining. And if we leave that aside as well, the direct consequences of the external intervention non-sanctioned by the international community will aggravate the situation in a country which is claimed to be saved from dictatorship and for the sake of democracy. I heard with great concern that from Paris and London there have already been statements about NATO, the possibility of NATO to interfere in order to destroy the chemical weapons in Syria without the sanction of the mandate from the UN Security Council. That is a very slippery slope. And our partners, Western partners, have been on that for several times. But I hope that the common sense will prevail and we should think of how we should help the region in the whole, but not support one country in the region against other countries in the region. We should think of how we could create the conditions for the regional reconciliation so that every country would be a comfortable place to live, so that there would be tolerance to ethnic and religious minorities, and so that the rights of all those people were being enhanced. That is what the efforts of the international community should be aimed at, to help all the states in the region to find national peace and national conciliation, and not to divide those states in the hope to solve their own political and geopolitical tasks. Thank you. Russian Information News Agency. RIA Novosti, Olga Denisova. Mr. Lavrov, according to the current statements from the Western mass media, US and Great Britain are preparing themselves for the intervention in Syria in connection with the use of chemical weapons on the 21st of August. According to your recent contacts with John Kerry, what do you think? How high is the probability of this military operation by the US and Great Britain in this country? In that country. Well, yesterday, John Kerry said at the end of the conversation, a long conversation, I should say, he promised to me to study our arguments very attentively, and he says that he'll call back in the following days to continue the dialogue. Forecasts and predictions, that is not a very good thing to do. You know that some actions have already begun. That is the similar scenario to Iraq 10 years ago and to Libya. I mentioned already that as soon as there is a small light at the end of this dark tunnel, there are always some people who want to undermine the peaceful transition of the situation to the political process. When the observers of the Arab League in the autumn of 2011 began working in Syria and reporting unbiasedly about the situation, they were immediately withdrawn. Kofi Annan peace plan resulted in the UN observers on the ground. They worked for 3 months, and their first steps allowed to lower a little bit the level of violence in the country. Someone did not like that, and around the UN observers there began regular provocations. There was the situation of intolerance around them, and our Western colleagues in the UN Security Councils refused to extend their mandate for another 3 months. This chance was lost. There was a conference in Geneva where there was a communique adopted by consensus of all the key players, including permanent members of the UN Security Councils, the Arab League, Turkey, the European Union, the UN, etc. And we suggested to adopt this document in the UN Security Council, and we received the refusal on the grounds that this document, which was taken by consensus, should be joined by a threat, a sanction threat against the Assad regime. So the arrangement was undermined again. Then there was the situation which I have mentioned. The head of the National Coalition, Khatib, spoke about the readiness to have dialogue with Damascus without preconditions, and he was put away quickly and changed for the leaders which did not express such thoughts. And after that, the Russian-American initiative on creating the conference to follow the Geneva communique, which our partners did not want to adopt in the UN Security Council last year, and the situation we see as it goes. And now there's the situation around the using of chemicals weapons. And of course this situation works to undermine the latest initiative, because, as we have all heard, under the pretext of punishing the regime for the events of the 21st of August, although no one has yet proved anything, but there have been already statements that the regime is to blame. There were statements done without the Security Council. So under the pretext of this, there is a huge military group, including the US, the Great Britain, etc., and some other countries, which is being accumulated on the borders of Syria. That is the Navy groups and other military units. And in this condition, of course, the opposition does not want to agree to go to the conference, because why do they need it when all the military infrastructure will be bombed soon, and then they could become the leaders of Damascus? But this is not just an illusion. This is a huge mistake which will not lead to any peace and calm situation. This will lead only to more bloodshed in the civil war in Syria.
Another fact that proves that someone is willing to thwart all their efforts of normalizing the situation, like Alexander Kazimierz has just told me while we were preparing for the press conference. The experts, chemical experts of the United Nations, have started their first mission in situ. They went to a specific district and they were shot by snipers on the territory controlled by militants. Someone might say that the snipers shot from some other side, but anyway, it's all links of one chain, and these all do not instill optimism. Okay, Bloomberg, please. Good day, Mr. Lavrov. Could you please tell us whether Russia also has the information from surveillance services probably confirming that this attack might have been a provocation for the part of opposition? What attack? I'm referring to the chemical weapons attack of the 21st of August. You know what? This is not a question to the Russian special services. It suffices to browse the websites and see that there are images of the shell that was exploded, and the description of the substance, the approximate description of the substance. It looks like the shell that was exploded in Haleb suburb on the 19th of March. the thing I previously referred to, and the professionals who have the track record of working with the OPCW draw everybody's attention to the fact that these video images suggest very many questions, like there are images, appalling images of dozens of children lying on the ground. And there is a question that appears, that crops up: how could they assemble all together at the same time? And so these scenarios displayed in the images and the video clips don't look like the symptoms of sarin or some other chemical agent poisoning. So why do the medical personnel attending these affected by the chemical agents don't have any protection means? And the internet contains as well the emails, email interceptions, and one can conclude after reading them that the substances were supplied from abroad, probably. And there was a substance, scronium, discovered recently. I cannot state anything firmly and resolutely, but I believe that the Syrian government had no need to resort to chemical arms, because the experts are working there and the military alignment is in the favor of the government. And one of these days the US-Russian meeting is to be held to prepare the Geneva II conference. So would the regime have benefited under these circumstances to have used chemical weapons amid these active operations of UN experts? And on the other hand, one might have been interested, well, if wishing to deal a blow to the regime from abroad, one might organize such a provocation against the regime. I can't state anything firmly, unlike those who already made claims that the government made these crimes. But I believe that we should wait for the objective results of the investigation by a group of experts, unless it is thwarted by a sniper, shelling or any other assault. Russia Leum, please, TV channel. Off the mic. Mic is off. On many occasions, repeatedly, you warned against a military intervention into the Syrian conflict, saying that it would lead to grave consequences and after effects for Syria and for the whole of the region. Could you specify what these after effects, horrendous after effects, be? I believe that we already can witness these horrible consequences of the previous interventions in the region. Look what is happening in Libya. The central government, with which we are in a state of a dialogue, does not control huge regions of the country, and the militants, including those who participated in deposing of Gaddafi, took their arms and went to Mali, where they received, where they were dealt a blow. But in Niger, in Chad, and other countries, they are feared. Look at Iraq. Every day, dozens of people perish there, and hundreds are wounded as a result of bloody terrorist attacks. Look at what is happening in Syria now. It's a real, full-fledged civil war. The government is waging a war against what is called Free Syrian Army, and a great number of terrorists like Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State of Lebanon, Iraq, and other terrorist units and groups. And the Syrian Free Army faces terrorists every now and then and merged with them. Probably if someone thinks that if one shells all the infrastructure and erases it to the ground, allowing the opposition to win, it's an illusion. Even if the victory of the opposition is there, the civil war will continue, but the current government will become the opposition. And the region has a number of instances to cite. Dear colleagues, bear in mind this schedule. So we will take two more questions, couple more questions. Kommersant newspaper, broadsheet newspaper. Thank you so much, Sergei Viktorovich. I have a request to you. Could you specify on the mechanism of the Commission's operation? It does not have a mandate. Yeah, I can see you. To specify who exactly committed the attack, but if it establishes that there was an attack with this or that substance, and then the information is submitted to the Security Council, what if the Security Council members disagree and cannot meet each other halfway? Will the Security Council be not accused of sitting on the hands? And what time does the Commission have to establish the facts? Because, as Western media report, the decision on the intervention may be taken within the upcoming days. I have already said that the Western leaders make statements judging by they don't want to expect the results of the Commission's activity. They have made their own decisions. They made no comment on our detailed report that was presented as a result of our investigation of what happened on the 19th of March. And the report is a very detailed and professional one, with all the probes and tests cited, and the laboratories are certified with the OPCW. And this is also part of the mandate of the Commission, and the visits to the Ghouta region of the 21st of August, where the attack of the 21st of August took place, was coordinated additionally when the mission had already arrived in Damascus. And the OPCW, which sent its experts to the region, has its own procedure and rules. They don't make any accusative, they don't accuse anybody. They just cite facts that a shell was found, whether the production mode was improvised or industrial, whether it's in line with the industrial standards or it's an improvised device, and it presents all the objective facts. And later the UN Security Council is to decide, and every now and then the UN Security Council members can't arrive at a unanimous conclusion. And let me guess that the surety, the firm surety and confidence that they are right, expressed by our Western partners, saying they need no tests and probes, they know everything by default, and their surveillance services received cogent evidence. All these statements suggest what stance they might adopt at the UN Security Council.